Hello friends, this time I'll show you my Bulwark Druid build on Diablo 4 in order to speedfarm Nightmare Dungeons level 100. You'll see that you can one-shot everything including the bosses and that you are quite tanky in order to speedfarm this last level of dungeons. I'll explain everything in that video, and if it's not done already, don't forget to subscribe. For the skill, you'll be of course playing the Bulwark, and then we have the Blood Hole to get some Spirit critical strike chance, Hurricane to debuff enemies, and Cataclysm as our ultimate. Storm Strike to get Spirit and also to boost the Bulwark, and you have the Shred for the mobility. Now for the gear, it will be very important to have barrier generation where you can. First on your helm, and you'll also want damage reduction when you're in a werewolf. You can also have it on the chest and get armor when you do damage. Also get some armor and damage reduction on it. For the gloves, increase damage when you have a barrier, increase critical strike chance, and Earth skills critical damage. For the pants, damage reduction after landing a basic attack and also damage reduction on it. For the boots, increase movement speed when you are unstoppable, and you can either get some stats if you need in order to have the last Paragon nut bonuses or some damage reduction. For the weapon, increase critical strike damage for Earth skill after using a Storm skill, and for the stat critical strike damage with Earth skill, vulnerable damage, and some will. For the totem, you also want barrier generation on it, and the fact that werewolf skills will function as Storm skill for the Nature's Fury. You can also get some cooldown reduction and critical strike chance on it. For the rings, you'll want barrier generation, vulnerable damage, critical damage, and so on. For the aspect, Blood Hole will increase your critical strike chance and increase damage based on your spirit. Lastly, for the amulet, the cooldown reduction for the barrier, and you want on it some stats and some armor. To finish this part, I'll let you have a look at the stats being currently level 96. For the gems, you want barrier generation on your armor parts, and for the weapons, increase critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. If you are in non-leather, you can put some skulls in your jewelry, otherwise you want the stacking of damage. Here you have enemies which are pulled during your ultimate, and the last one, the damage reduction. For the boons, you want damage reduction from Elite, increase attack speed and critical strike damage, fortify when you use a defensive spell, and cooldown reduction for your ultimate. For the skill tree, first you'll get the fact that you have a chance to make enemies vulnerable, the additional dash for shred, and increase critical strike chance just here. We have 5 points in the Bulwark, and you'll get this one, of course, for the damage. 3 points here, just 1 here, and this one with the spirit generation. A bit below you can put 1 point here in order to get some spirit, and we'll have the damage reduction for the hurricane. Then you have some additional damage here and here, and you can put some points here between 1 and 3 in order to always be fortified. You also have below the fact that you have increased critical strike damage against poison enemies, and the poison just here. After, we have increased damage to elites, Earth skill damage to vulnerable enemies, and increased damage after using a Storm skill for your Earthen Bulwark. We end up with the ultimate. Here you have some damage reduction after shapeshifting, and of course the Nature's Fury. For the Paragon, you want to get this glyph in order to boost your critical strike damage and the critical strike damage that the enemies take. After, we have this node which will increase your damage, and then you can get this board increasing your damage of your Earth skill. You have here an interesting passive for the damage, here for the armor, and this one boosting your damage while fortified. After that, at the top of it, we have this board. We won't be needing this node, but we get this glyph increasing vulnerable damage. It will also make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds when you hit them. Even if this glyph has been nerfed, it's interesting because you'll one-shot everything as they'll always be vulnerable. After we go at the top, we don't get this node, but we get this glyph increasing damage to close enemies, and at the right we don't take the malice, but we have this glyph, the Fangon Claw, increasing the power of the blue nodes. Lastly, to finish this Paragon setup, you can go this way in order to unlock the last glyph. For the gameplay, in addition to the footage at the beginning of the video, I'll let you the World Dungeon T100 with this build. I just died once stupidly because I was waiting for the shrine effect to run out, but otherwise you'll see that you can easily jump in pack of elites and one-shot everything. Just make sure when you do so to have your bulwark ready. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget that as usual you have the article with the builder and so on SlashingCreeps.com. And if you have any question, feel free to post in the comments, I'll be happy to answer you.